Hey guys, welcome to another awesome episode of The Unlikely Journey. This is Stephen Kwong, along with Nathalise Blair Robinson and Jess Furman. Nathalise, we have a very special guest this morning. Can you please do us the wonderful intro?
Absolutely. So I am so excited to welcome Nell Derick Debevoise to the podcast today. Nell is a passionate entrepreneur. She's a speaker. She's an author who is the co-founder and CEO of Purposeful Growth Institute and a partner at Purpose Fused. Nell has studied at some of the world's top universities, from Harvard and Columbia to Cambridge and London Business School. She's lived and worked in the private, public, and for-profit sectors on 4 continents. She's supported refugees in the Middle East, taught corporate executives in New York about stakeholder capitalism, and even mediated between Turkish and Cypriot officials. Recently, Nell published a book called Going First: Courage, Purpose, and Action. It's an inspiring read for anyone who wants to make an impact in their career. Lastly, I will say that Nell is just an awesome human being who's super curious and smart and adventurous. Nell, I think you speak like 13 languages or something crazy like that. And she certainly inspired me to think about a career that is just as much for good as it is for profit. So with that, Nell, why don't you take us through, just tell our audience a little bit about you.
Flattered, Nathalise. That was way too kind. Thank you. And just to make sure that I don't get any calls for translation, I speak 5 languages like okay. So that's largely a result of living abroad and dating abroad. That's my biggest life hack, is if you want to learn a language, just date somebody who speaks that language.
Now, I'm going to have to burst your bubble here. The minimum requirement to be on this show is 7 languages, so you're too short.
Shoot. Did we just hang up? Shoot.
No. But seriously, uber impressive. So I think Nathalise is right. Please tell us about yourself. But more importantly, what are you doing on this podcast? Tell us. Get us excited.
Well, I'm here because The Unlikely Journey is probably as apt a book title for my memoir when it comes out as any, firstly. Secondly, I think Nathalise is just an absolutely beautiful human being in every way, since I was able to be part of her career journey, as she mentioned, when she was an MBA fellow for my company. Nathalise, I think we're coming on 10 years ago.
No, it was not 10 years ago. No, it was like 7 years ago.
7? Yeah. Okay, that rounds up to 10. Just saying. You're the MBA, okay. But just saying. So my unlikely journey, I promise I won't go month by month, but I'm going to bring us back to when I was 12. And I was a 6th grader, very proud, nerdy little 6th grader at this great urban public elementary school. And now this school was everything that I think a lot of fellow Americans like to think of as great public American education, right? We walked to school. It was this old brick building. We had very involved parents. There was band and there was a Mayfair and, all of these great things. By the way, in retrospect, it was wildly diverse in terms of race, but also socioeconomic status. And some of the dads were stay-at-home dads and some of the moms worked. It was just a very cool community. But the public school that I and my classmates were zoned to go to was not. It was a hot mess. If you watch the show The Wire, this was very much Hartford's version of Baltimore at that time. It was just gangs and drugs. I mean, the conditions were horrible, to say nothing of the education not being top-notch in any way, academic or otherwise. And so my parents were, kind of solidly middle class, not that we were flush with cash, but they had the wherewithal to know that that was not going to be a good plan. And so they sort of gave me the option, as a precocious, annoying 12-year-old that I was, whether I would go to private school at that point in 7th grade, or we would move over a town line into a leafy green suburb with great public schools. So I went to a few private schools and I really didn't like the vibe. There were uniforms at some of them. It felt weird. And so I said, in my 12-year-old economics, why don't you just buy a new house and we'll move over the town line? So turns out they had to scramble a little bit for that as well. But they did it, and we moved truly. I've checked on Google Maps. It's like 430 yards, I think, just maybe 1,000 feet more or less. over a town line. And all of a sudden I had access to this unbelievable public school system with AP programs and guidance counselors. And I was, again, that same precocious, nerdy self. I was in a peer mentoring program, and I sat with the superintendent on a planning committee for our high school, and blah, 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 while I watched my classmates go towards a very different experience in 7th grade and then 8th and on through high school. And so as I launched off to Harvard, thanks to these guidance counselors and AP programs, their outcomes were very different. And so this was my kind of early visceral experience that talent is really distributed equally through the population. My classmates were incredible human beings, but opportunity is not. So anyway, I can pause there and talk more about my adult life a little bit if it's of interest, but I think that really is the seed that kind of got me on this path of knowing that I wanted my career to somehow address this problem of distributing opportunity more equally.
Super helpful context. So one thing that I love to do is I love to pivot, jump, skip, go forward, go backwards. I'm going to skip all the way forward. Now,
Cool.
Tell us about what you're involved in. You have a B Corp. Most of us know a C Corp, but what is a B Corp? What is your mission? What is the impact that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. So it's been this really cool year of kind of dawning the 3rd decade of my professional life, right? I'm celebrating a 20-year reunion from college in a few months and a 10-year reunion from business school, and entering this 3rd decade. So a few months ago, that was like really traumatic and fuzzy and complicated and like frustrating because I didn't realize I was in that transition. But now that I see where I am, it's really cool. And so I'm glad you asked. So right now, I have gotten really clear that what I care about is making work fairer and healthier for all human beings on the planet, because I think when we do that, we get toward justice and equity. And so I looked, it's a very similar version of that 12-year-old purpose, right? But I've come at it from quite different ways over the past 20 years. And now what I'm doing is very much in that B Corp space that you mentioned. And essentially a B Corp is a for-profit, for-purpose company. But rather than just being that in name, it actually is something that's externally audited. There's a not-for-profit organization called B Lab, and they have set out this really pretty thoughtful and rigorous and comprehensive set of standards. They have 5 different areas that they look at. That includes the governance of your company, the way your company deals with customers, the way your company deals with your employees or workers, 4th, your community involvement, and finally, your impact on the environment. And so they look at all these things. It's like a 240-point questionnaire, if I recall correctly.
Wow.
And you have to, it's really, it's really rigorous. It's really in depth. You have to provide data to back up your answers. And then you have to get a score over an 80 out of a total 160 of those questions to become a certified B Corp. And so it's really robust. And then every 3 years they come back and they check on you and they say, how's it going? How's this all doing? So it's really powerful because it's not just about a company saying, we stand for all human lives and then going on their way selling sneakers or whatever they might sell. It really gets into the weeds of your company to see what negative impacts you're having, frankly, is about 80% of the measure, but then also where are the positive impacts that you're contributing. And it's getting more and more popular. I mean, the bulk of B Corps are still smaller companies, but there are also household names like Patagonia or Seventh Generation, buy your toilet paper from them, or Ben and Jerry's, follow up on them with the munchies whenever you need that. Or, there are plenty of very household names that any of us could switch our day-to-day purchasing to and align our money with our values in that way.
So, Nell, this is incredible. I mean, one of my biggest questions was always like, I think the auditing of it, because like, I've sat on the boards of a ton of charities, and like, and even especially like the fiscal sponsor world where you're like, like it's borderline like, yeah, exactly, where you're like, yeah, right, and how the fiscal sponsor world works, where you're like, I need this, but it's kind of funneling money, and I mean, it's. doing research on like, when I had this grant fund, like we were trying to find fiscal sponsors where like they weren't overpaying, their executives, it was founded by, CPAs that know a bunch of these tax loopholes. So like, I guess one of my questions for you would be, and I love like where this, like, I love where your story started, like in terms of like equitable access to education and resources. Like I had a very similar experience. I grew up in Westchester, but we weren't in like the rich part of Westchester, and like we didn't have enough money for clay and like extra, like if I wanted to take any type of advanced classes, all the kids that ended up at the Harvards and the Yales, their parents paid to have them go to local colleges. Like we didn't have AP classes, we didn't have access to any of that stuff. So you really do start to see like, wow, like as I'm applying to these schools, like this wasn't offered where I went to school, and my parents didn't know enough to to ask or to think to send me to college while I was in high school to get, to catch me up to that level. So that being said, I was really curious when I was listening to your journey. I know it is kind of a hot button like buzzword to say like we're a social impact, socially responsible corporation. Like what are there companies that can switch into B Corps? Like how do you have this conversation in different sectors where you're able to like maybe kind of sway things into a certain way, or do you find that like a company has to kind of start off from an impact standpoint, at the very start?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, of course, there certainly are a lot of companies and an increasing number of companies, which is so exciting to me because I just think generationally we're going in the right direction, right? And when you look at the rate of death in the Fortune 500 right now, it's pretty quick turnover. So, so many of the companies that are being founded today with this profit and purpose mentality baked in, as we call it, right from the beginning, presumably, hopefully, will be the Fortune 500 of, 2035 or however long it'll take. That said, there are some unbelievably inspiring stories of companies becoming B Corps later on in their evolution, including like Danone, right? Or Danone, as some Americans pronounce it, but that like massive yogurt company, as we primarily know it, turns out they do a lot else as well. It's a massive European conglomerate. But a friend and mentor of mine, Lorna Davis, was the CEO of Danone North America. So I don't know exactly. We're probably talking 1 to 2 billion of turnover at that point. And she stewarded the full B Corp certification of that entity. And since then, Emmanuel Faber, the global CEO, who unfortunately was squeezed out, and that's a whole nother story if we really want to get into the sordid politics of B Corps, which might be worth it. But he then followed up to bring the entire global footprint to B Corp certification. And gosh, candidly, I am not sure where they're at. Last time I checked, I think they were something like 1/2 to 2/3 of the global corporation. I'm not sure that they ever got to 100%. But, I mean, I say these, 200 questions and these 160 points. It was a little bit of a, head twisting exercise for me and my like 10-person services firm, right? So imagine what they're dealing with a massive global supply chain, producing food, producing children's nutritional supplements, bottled water, right? I mean, the complexity is just massive, but they did it.
Wow.
So I think it's really important to, your point about the audit is so important, having that external validation. I think I always want to get in there. It's also not perfect. And so I caution people against, we have this like reverence for data, and of course it matters and it's important, and let's look at the numbers. And when you're talking about saving lives or distributing educational opportunity, the data is only part of the story, right? Or the quantitative data, which is what we tend to overvalue. And so I always share with people the experience of certifying as a B Corp, right? And they asked us, like one of the questions, as it should be, is around employees, right? And employee engagement. And so the question was like, are your employees engaged? Which, I don't know, like,
wow.
Do you guys know, like, do you have a thermometer that you can just like give your, so I mean, I don't know, Natalie, you remember, I think we were a pretty darn engaged team. So like we do some surveys. We did a survey. Turns out we had like a, 9.3 net promoter of our 15 folks at the time. And boom, I put that we were engaged, right? But there are things like that, or, when they asked about some of our like carbon output data, I'm like, hey, Yael, like, did you turn on your light this morning? And that was our carbon. I mean, it's just some of these things. And you can imagine the opposite case for Danone, right? Like, how are they possibly accurately counting all of their offices, all of their plants, to say nothing of their upstream suppliers, who should absolutely count as part of their footprint? So anyhow, I think the audit and the guideline and the thought leadership that B Lab provides is absolutely essential and brilliant and powerful. And we have not cracked the case on really measuring and understanding this, partially because we undervalue qualitative information and human stories, and partially because it's probably just too massive to count. And I think it's the Einstein quote, right? That not everything that matters can be measured, and vice versa.
This is super informative stuff. My head is blowing up. It's about to explode. Wow. Thank you for that. It's so jam-packed with info. So I'm going to move from Danone back to your company, SoCap. Tell me, what are the functional lines or the lines of revenues that you guys are measuring within your company, and what do you actually do for your clients?
Yeah. So there's two main buckets, let's call it, maybe a third that will break out. But the first one that we do, and I'll start with this because it's how Natalie and I engaged, is that we recruit, place, develop, and manage, or mentor rather, diverse and purpose-grown talent. Super fun area of work right now. We started that work in 2013, and it's just, blown up since then in terms of the types of folks who are really wanting their careers to be a force for good in the world, and the types of companies that are conscious about the power of that talent, right? Coming from different backgrounds, whether it's demographically or academically, or thinking styles, or, all of those differences. And then, though, who are clear about wanting to be purpose driven and somewhere on the journey of clarifying their purpose, right? I do believe that that's a lifelong journey. And so it's not that you have to hire folks who have a purpose statement at the top of their resume, but you have to hire, or you should hire folks, if you're looking for creativity and collaboration and retention, who are on the journey of self-awareness, right? Who am I? What am I good at? And what do I care about?
So if I'm hearing this right, are you all actually going out there headhunting and then providing a developmental model for these
Essentially.
resources? Wow.
Yeah, essentially.
How fun is that?
It's really fun. It's really, really fun. We do it in fellowships. So we start with the candidate, not with the role, if that makes sense. Probably makes it a little harder for us. But hey, that's what I'm here for. And so we recruit people to then participate in fellowships where they get to do this development of their own purpose and then implement that in a project basis, which sometimes turns into full-time work. But we suggest that kind of try before you buy on both sides. And so the fellow gets to try out a project, the employer gets to see that fellow's work, and then should they, be a match, then fabulous. They know that it's really low risk and they carry on.
What a really interesting way to do it. I mean, it makes sense. Like, I mean, I'm from the entertainment industry, so like try before you buy is taken to the far extreme in pretty much everything. Like you pretty much are completing a product before it's purchased. But that's, I mean, so have you found like in terms of like, because I think an entry point for me, like I really identify with a lot of, I think, a lot of what you shared in terms of, like, I'm always thinking, like, how do I have the most impact with my time, right? And how do I enter a scenario and leverage my network to maybe infiltrate places where, people haven't realized what their resources are. And if we connect some dots, we'll make we suddenly just a little click here and there, and everyone's kind of benefiting, in terms of the charities I work with, or different, people don't look, sometimes they don't think about it. So, when you're integrating, these, the new cohort of talent, like, are you specifically then, kind of lending them into spaces that are like pre-existing in terms of wanting like that purpose and impact? Or are you also able to use these candidates to kind of seed maybe companies that haven't entirely thought of things from that perspective?
Yeah, really, yes. I mean, so one of the frameworks in my book that has emerged over these 10 years of work is the spectrum of impact. And so the point there is that every single friggin' organization on this planet can and should, if we want to achieve the justice and equity that I talked about earlier, have a positive impact, right? And so that includes bagel shops as well as investment banks, right? The whole kit and caboodle. And then specifically the spectrum of impact is this notion of all the sectors, right? So you have the government and public sector. We have this fabulous partnership with the National Park Service in that world. Then, we talk about the not-for-profit world, which, Jess, it sounds like you know deeply, and is certainly part of the puzzle, despite certainly challenges to be resolved with plenty organizations there and the sector in general. Than with, kind of social enterprises and B Corps, and with very, traditional large corporations. So our clients, again, have included National Park Service as well as Goodwill, fabulous, huge national nonprofit, some really awesome startups, including the one that Natalie's worked with when she was with us, and then Campbell Soup Company, right? And so it really is all of the above, whether they're kind of working side by side with a founder to bake in that commitment to profit and purpose, or whether it's, an uphill battle, candidly, at Campbell Soup Company to really embed shared value from a position of a little bit of weakness, sitting over in the foundation and trying to shout over into the business. So it really is all of the above.
Now, to get to where you are today, I would imagine that it's been both a fantastic ride as well as one where you've had to lose some skin on your knee from falling down.
Stephen, it has been pure rainbows and unicorns, just easy. Mostly I eat bonbons and it's just a delight.
Of course, of course. Tell us about that. Tell us about all the dirty, dark secrets of propelling oneself from the beginning of your interests into where you are now. What are the major obstacles? What are some experiences that you might want to share? And then also maybe tell us about some positive trends that you're seeing in the industry as well that can give some of our younger listeners some more bullish, optimistic purview.
Yeah. So I think the first kind of theme here is being early to something, right? And on one hand, it's amazing. Like that's how a lot of fabulous companies that we know now as having been, a winner take all in a market started. They were early, and that's great. But we also know a lot of stories where the earliest players actually died, right? So like, sorry, MySpace, that's too bad. Great idea. Didn't work. Sorry, Palm and BlackBerry, RIP. And so I think that has been a struggle. Look, even just the last few years, honestly, the first few months of COVID, apart from being horrified at the inequity with which the suffering was being distributed through our population and through the world, look, I'm going to tell you, there was a little part of me celebrating because I was like, okay, all these corporate execs are being brought to their friggin' knees because they are somewhat susceptible as well, or their grandparents are, their parents, even if not as much as if they were underemployed or Black or brown or, other things. But great, this is the, kind of come to your knees moment that a lot of people require to get in touch with purpose and the importance of leaving a positive legacy. And so I was like, hurrah, we've arrived, right? Like all of this that I've been talking about for 8 years and a lot of other smart people have been talking about for decades, even before that, is going to be a thing. Like, hurrah, here we go.
Right.
And look, it hasn't, goodness gracious, there has been some awakening and some reckoning over these last few years. And thank goodness. And I do remain still very bullish about it. But I'm talking about like the whole global economy, right? That I want to change. So This is not like a racing yacht that's just going to spin around and head the other way all of a sudden. There's some time to make the changes. And so but in the meantime, here I am trying to pay myself a salary or my team of 10 or my team of 1 at various points, and so being
absolutely
on the cutting edge doesn't always pay well. So that's one thing that has definitely been and continues to be, honestly, a challenge of, am I early and smart and I should just keep talking about this, or should I like pack it in and do something else, lean into my leadership coaching with horses that I'm now apprenticing to do for the next 20 years and wake back up when business for good is really a thing and it can be my bread and butter. So being early is just a double-edged sword. Look, I don't encourage anybody who is kind of an early futuristic thinker to not be that, because it's a strength in a bunch of ways. I just encourage you to also be really conscious of the shadow side, and what does that mean for how you function in organizations and how you get yourself paid and all of that. So that's one thing. And then the second, of course, is just this notion of value and money and capital and financial capital versus human capital and social capital. And it's just so ironic and meta that I have spent my career thinking about financial capital versus human capital and my own and other people's and investing and, all of that, because I have struggled to make this profitable, right? I'm in the process of winding down Inspiring Capital to, as the phoenix rises from the ashes, create a bunch of new things that absolutely carry the mission forward in different ways. But because I couldn't make it, right? And I am letting down some investors who put money in to grow it, and we were not able to turn that around. And look, there are myriad operational things that I could have done better. It's the whole range of internal and external factors and timing and all of that. But the irony is not lost on me that I'm like, profit and purpose can coexist and they have to. And yet here I am with this purpose-driven company that hasn't been able to make a go of it. So being early, really challenging, money, really challenging. And then I think the third that I would add is having chosen a fairly lone wolf approach. And look, I've had unfriggin' believable teammates over the years, but it has been a bit more in sort of an employee way. I've been a sole founder this whole time. And again, in retrospect, everything is 2020. I don't regret that. And I am clear that as I begin this next decade, I want to be working with partners, and whether that's formal partners in a company or a more regular board of advisors for me and my companies or otherwise, I undervalued the importance of that kind of small but consistent group of folks to help you stay motivated, first of all, maybe, but also, of course, to complement you, to grow you, to challenge you, and just to share beers and tears with at the end of the day. So lots more skinned knees where that comes from, but those are some themes.
First of all, I just wanted to say, I just love your authenticity and your genuine answer to this. For us, with Unlikely Journey, I think I know for me, a big goal, and I don't know if you've listened to some of our other podcasts, but you have to, if you don't share the struggles and you don't share things you've tried that have or haven't worked, we all try to be fairly vulnerable in this space, because that's how you learn, right? And you accomplish great things, and most people then pat you on the back and put you up in this high space and say, wow, you must have all the answers all the time, and you might have failed at 50 things before. So I just wanted to just acknowledge you in this space and say thank you for being willing to share some of the pitfalls recently with you. I do and this is maybe where my idealism runs with your idealism. I do think this new space that we're moving into, I firmly believe that if you can find a way to incentivize people, ideally people want to do good things because people are good, and I believe that, but I do think there's ways to incentivize people in a larger scale. This would start an entirely new topic, but I've been deep diving into Web3 and DAOs and this whole concept of community structure for building things. And you'd be surprised, building a business in that space is so different because people are willing to help each other in a way that, these traditional models that we're used to, you raise capital, you hire people, there's a different interaction between employers and employees than there is in some of these DAO systems that are being used to create and tapped to for these other networks to do things that are remarkable. So I think maybe you've been an early adopter, but I do think there's an emergent space with Web3 I'm a huge advocate for it, where like you might find what you've like this breadth of knowledge that you've gathered in this space with this different ideology of how to approach getting things done. There might be something really magical for you in that.
Yeah, no, here. I mean, that's a great shout. And look, I mean, I'm an evolution, not revolution girl. Like, we're doing some work right now with JM Smuckers, right? Like, did you guys have Smuckers jam on your PB&Js as kids?
I have that in my refrigerator right now.
Good. Keep buying it. They're really good people. They're really good people. I mean, so that, we have this placement plus thing that I talked about. The whole other line of business and place I spend my time is on leadership development. And we do that everywhere. I mean, I'm fascinated and a total neophyte at Web3, but Jess, that's inspiring to dig into. But in the meantime, we've done work with Amex and Smucker and, these companies, and I completely agree. They are good people. Like, they do not wake up in the morning wanting to be misogynists who burn more carbon than they need to burn. I promise you. But here we are, right? And the metric of success is a bigger SUV and a fancy title and buying your kids, cram courses so that they get into a fancy college and, photoshopping them into a new sport if they didn't do it on their own. Like, it's crazy, the system that we've built, and not to set individuals free of responsibility, but it is a system, and that's really powerful. So exactly right about the incentives. And just, I think what these last 2 years have done is crack people open. And so what I'm seeing in every corner that will have me, at least, which is a little bit of a self-selecting group of corners, but it includes all of these different places of startups and investment firms and Fortune 500 and nonprofits and foundations. And there's this famine after decades to be real and to think about other humans and to do work in a way that feels good to our bodies and our minds and our hearts, and to let that happen for other people. So I am deeply positive about it. I just am also impatient, and I'm not sure it's going to happen quite on my schedule. So I'm working on that.
And speaking of equity, I am going to give you your time back. So I'm going to say thank you so much on the behalf of Natalice Kalea Robinson, Jess Furman, myself, Stephen Kwong. Nell, it's been a fantastic time listening to you. We wish you the best in your journey. If there's anything that we can do to support that, please let us know. And if you're thinking about headhunting 3 people to be on your next board, I think you have 3 sitting right here talking to you. Just throwing a little shameless self-promotion out there. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. We wish you the best, and we wish you to stay in touch with you as well.
I'll send over the PDF, the little free excerpt of the book, so people can get a bit better sense if your listeners are wanting some of the meat and potatoes behind these lofty ideas.
Absolutely. We'll be promoting that.
Cheers.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Peace.
Peace. Thank you.